Hello, everybody. Welcome tonight, and welcome to the Daniels faculty. For any of you who don't already know, I'm Robert Levitt, and I'm the acting dean. I'd like to thank all of you for attending tonight's event, a lecture by architect Shirley Bloomberg entitled "One Clover and a Bee," a mysterious title which I think we will understand after in the lecture. Before we proceed, I'd like to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, the meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. So, this evening's speaker, Shirley Bloomberg, is a prominent architect based here in Toronto, a member of the Order of Canada for her contributions to architecture and community, and a longtime friend and supporter of the faculty here. She's a founding partner of KPMB Architects and has designed many of the firm's most noteworthy projects across a wide range of scales. In addition to her accomplished academic and cultural projects, Shirley has focused on social justice through her work in affordable housing. To capture the range of her work, I'll mention a few. The competition-winning art gallery of Nova Scotia, an affordable residential community in Toronto, and prototype housing for the Northern Indigenous community of Fort Severn in Ontario. Several years ago, Shirley joined a group of like-minded colleagues in a conversation that ultimately evolved into BEAT, which stands for Building Equality in Architecture, Toronto. The purpose of the grassroots initiative is to promote the equality for women in the profession, and it's since grown to include chapters across the country. So in this evening's lecture, One Clover and a Bee, Shirley will explore architecture's expanding role in addressing global challenges, focusing on climate change, social equity, and community impact. Beginning with the climate emergency, she will introduce and discuss KPMB's approach, which leverages innovative design and construction methods to significantly reduce carbon emissions. And then the lecture will shift to social equity, highlighting BEAT's advocacy as well as some affordable housing projects aimed at addressing inequity in Canada. Finally, her presentation will underscore KPMB's commitment to enhancing public spaces and fostering community through projects such as the Harrison McCain Pavilion addition to the Beaverbrook Gallery in New Brunswick, as well as the award-winning Montreal Holocaust Museum. These examples illustrate architecture can be a force for sustainability, inclusivity, and positive community transformation. So following the lecture, Shirley and I will sit down and chat for a little bit, and then we will also turn the conversation out to you in the audience for any questions or comments you'd like to make. So please join me in welcoming Shirley to the stage. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Robert, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you all for coming out on another wintry night. I'm a very proud alumna of this school, and it's great to be here again today. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge my partners, Bruce Kobara and Marianne McKenna, who are here. A lot of people from our office here. They've been amazing collaborators and great partners for years of practice together. To be precise, 38 years of practice. How scary is that? The title of my talk is from a poem by Emily Dickinson, written in 1855. as I began thinking about this presentation, I kept coming back to that poem. It resonated for me and seems particularly timely. So here it is. To make a prairie. To make a prairie, it takes a clover and one bee. One clover and a bee. And reverie. The reverie alone will do if bees are few. Sadly, we're in a time when bees are literally and metaphorically few. And we must rely heavily on reverie. For me, the poem represents the optimism and determination we need. On my first day of architecture school, we were told this: Marcus Vitruvius Polio's definition of architecture, and I've never found a better definition. Firmness, commodity, and delight. Admittedly, we've been rather short on delight in recent years. But architecture has always been the framework for people's daily lives. And every generation of architects responds to the times in which they live. The test of architecture has always been, what can it do for society? We all know only too well that this is the time of compounding and increasing uncertainty and unprecedented global challenges. Yet, I find it inspiring that architects have never been more relevant. It's our synthetic practice, our integrative design thinking, which Roger Martin, who was the dean of the Rotman School of Management here at U of T, described as the ability to hold two opposing ideas or issues in our minds at once and reach an innovative solution that resolves both. I'm going to start this evening with some examples of what KPMB is doing to mitigate the climate emergency. What we're doing about resource depletion and social inequity. There is so much going on in the studio that it's impossible to describe it all, so I'm going to focus on the work I've directed. We all know that the built environment is currently responsible for 42% of annual global CO2 emissions. However, the City of Toronto's 2022 sector-based emissions inventory claims the built environment is responsible for 56% of emissions. We have our work cut out for us in this city. So how do we move from contributing to the climate emergency to being part of the solution? I wanted to start with the Landmark project here at U of T, which we won the competition working with Michael van Valkenburg, landscape architects out of Brooklyn. We all recall how the lawn at King's College Circle was just surrounded by parking, and how we all took our lives in our hands by dodging trucks and cars, the steady stream that just circled the lawn. So the breakthrough idea was to remove the cars from the heritage center of the campus and transform all the heritage landscape spaces into, which included King's College Circle, Hart House, Sudan Wilson Quad, and Tower Road. On our first visit to the site together, Michael van Valkenburg said, "It's all hiding in plain sight. We don't have to do very much. Our job is to bring it into focus." And he was so on point. After the parking was removed, the vehicular access was severely limited and pedestrians were prioritized. Michael van Valkenburg's office rehabilitated the lawn and designed a necklace of gardens and trees encircling it. Really, whoops, sorry. wrong one. Really, really beautiful. I don't think the pointer works, but anyway. Okay. A much more robust turf and soil was installed in the lawn, and we designed a single level of parking garage below with an entry pavilion to access it. When we were in DD, the university made the bold decision to add a substantial geothermal field below the garage. And this is the section diagram. I'm sure you all know that U of T has been ranked the most sustainable university in the last 2 years, the most sustainable university in the world. And this project is instrumental in that. It's the largest contributor to the university's annual reduction target of 44,500 metric tons of CO2. So this section shows, it's a section through King's College Circle. That white sliver below the lawn is the garage, and you see UCC in the background. We have 374 boreholes, 800 feet deep. And this results in a reduction of 15,000 metric tons of CO2 per annum. So it really does advance the university's goal of carbon positive by 2050. This was when the project opened last fall, early winter, and it was quite incredible. The U of T has always lacked a heart, and now I feel this truly is the heart of the entire campus. It's a central gathering place. The place is mobbed by students. It really is the city's central park as well. And this, you can see here the effect of MVVA's necklace of gardens around the lawn. And this is only after really 1 year. This is in front of MedSci on the left, and then there's a shot of our pavilion, which accesses the underground parking garage on the right. Two things that guide and drive our carbon reduction strategies are our lab and the long collaboration we've had with our brilliant consultants like Transsolar Climate Engineers out of Germany and New York. We've worked with them literally for decades on all our, not all, we love all our projects, on many of our projects, and in 2016 collaborated with them on the Building Energy Vision study for Princeton University as part of the last campus plan. The lab is embedded in every project that we do, and everything that the lab does is actionable in our work. So this is really the question. We must learn to do more with less. Less carbon, fewer resources. There are two pathways, either to build new or retrofit. So I wanted to just quickly talk about that. These are our offices on King Street East, and there's been a lot of focus on carbon emissions from buildings, but very little on interiors. And the amount of carbon that is embedded in interiors can actually be remarkably high if it's not flexible and adaptable, and it is being renovated every 10 years. Our lab did a little life cycle analysis of our studio design, and we saved a substantial amount of embodied carbon with some pretty simple, straightforward strategies: flexible open office layout, exposed structure, minimal finishes using low embodied carbon, and an emphasis on recycled materials and reusing our office furniture. This is an example that my partner Bruce worked on, which is the Wilson School of Design, Kwantlen Polytechnic University in Richmond, BC. And this building is also very interesting because it's a mass timber building, and that actually reduces the amount of embodied carbon by 20%, which is hugely significant. And then, as you can see, the rest of the building is pretty raw. So I'm going to talk about adaptive reuse. Retrofitting existing buildings, instead of building new, massively reduces the amount of embodied carbon. Here are just two. We've always done a lot of adaptive reuse. It's a substantial part of our portfolio, and I'm just going to show you two of many, many projects. So this is a project at Princeton University that we completed in 2017, a late 20s collegiate Gothic building, enormous, 200,000 square feet, and it used to be the Frick Chemistry laboratories. We renovated the interiors entirely, and we did some strategic additions, like this entrance of Scudder Plaza on the right. This is what it looks like inside. This is the heart of the people who inhabit this building, most of them, at the Department of Economics. And they call this the Forum. And they like this idea very much because it would be a great space to celebrate their Nobel Prize winners in. To each their own. This is a building that's much earlier, from 2003, but this was the building that actually Princeton was very interested in when they invited us to compete. And this is the James Stewart Center for Mathematics at McMaster University, same vintage, the same collegiate Gothic suit of clothes on the exterior. And this is what we did in the interior. And what I love about adaptive use like this project is that you have these real gems of the windows and the historic door. This is the entrance. The math cafe is on the right. And we have these flexible blackboards where the students can sit and do tutorials or just basically study. So this is a really new concept, very new to us, and I think new to North America. And we've been working with Transolar again on a university project that's testing this out. So essentially, build simple means, rather than relying on sophisticated and carbon-intensive building systems, mechanical ventilation, cooling and heating, as we've done post-World War II, Build Simple combines all that we know now, our most progressive practice, with centuries-old principles of architectural design before HVAC, designing with nature responding to climatic context. This also applies to materials use. Fewer finishes, building elements, fewer resources, and low-carbon materials. I don't usually get so excited about mechanical systems, but I think this is an extraordinary breakthrough, and I'm just going to mention this essay called After Comfort by Daniel Barber, who's an American professor of architecture now teaching at the Technical University of Eindhoven. And he did an essay that has actually inspired a lot of this research. It's foundational to the idea of Build Simple. Essentially what he's saying is the conditioning the interior of our buildings has had an enormous cost in carbon emissions. It's about the level of indoor comfort that we expect in our buildings in North America and how to change behavior. When I immigrated here, I was absolutely baffled as to why building interiors were so warm in the winters and why they were so very cold in the summers. I really recommend everybody read this. It's really amazing. And this is a section of the building we were working on with Transolar, and it shows you trickle vents for air supply in winter and summer, operable windows for ventilation in the shoulder seasons, air cascade for extract, fan coil units for heating and cooling, and ceiling fans to mix the air. So we're going to move on to social equity. As Robert mentioned, I had co-founded BEAT with many of my female colleagues, and as it's International Women's Day on Saturday, I'd be remiss not to speak about it, and women in architecture. Build Building Equality in Architecture Toronto. This was, we won the 2024 RIIC Advocate for Architecture Award. And these were the jury comments. As we all know, women are, I think it's still about 60% in the schools as students, and the retention in the profession is abysmal. It has to change. About a decade ago, I reached out to female colleagues, and together we co-founded BEAT in 2015. And there are 7 chapters, as Robert mentioned, across the country. These are all the women in the advisory and executive committees. It's grassroots, volunteers, architects, and designers. And this is a matrix of what has been achieved in 9 years. And what I'm most interested in are the first 2 numbers. And that's actually only 7 years, because the stats for 22 were only available. There was a 12% increase in the retention of women in the profession, so I think that's not too bad. This might sound a little harsh, but I think Brian C. Lee Jr., who's a New Orleans-based architect activist, has a point. For nearly every injustice in the world, there's an architecture that has been planned and designed to perpetuate it. And it's becoming clearer and clearer that the built environment is far from equitable. Injustice and exclusion are embedded in our cities, and architects, unfortunately, have been knowingly or unknowingly complicit. Speaking of being complicit, I was born and raised in Cape Town, South Africa. A place of great natural beauty, in a society that was very, very ugly. Growing up in apartheid South Africa, in such an unjust society, has had an indelible impact on how I view the world and my work. It was many years after I came to Canada, and some of you might not know this, that I learned that the founders of apartheid in South Africa, after the Second World War, had used the Canadian Indian reservation system as a model. I found that unbelievably shocking. So, I'm going to talk about 3 affordable housing projects, and of course, the lack of affordable housing lies at the root of so many of our societal challenges. The first is the project that Robert alluded to, which was a resilient duplex for Fort Severn First Nation. When the living conditions of Attawapiskat First Nation on the shore of James Bay hit the news maybe about 8-9 years ago, it was very distressing. That was the trigger that led me to think that KPMB should contribute to resolving this crisis. And I have to say, Bruce and Marianne said, go for it. Awesome partners. I reached out to Brian Porter, whom many of you might know, of Two Row Architects. Brian is a Six Nations architect and a graduate of the school. We decided to work together on researching how the design of Northern Indigenous housing could be rethought to truly respond to the needs of the community and the climate. After close to 3 years of research, we had this opportunity to work together on this project. This is our rendering of the housing we designed for Fort Severn, the northernmost Indigenous community in Ontario. Chief Paul Burke had asked us to design a resilient duplex, which would house a flexible family unit and a single unit for an elder or a young single person or a couple. And you can see here the larger volume of the duplex. These are 3 duplexes. The larger volume is for the family unit and the smaller for the single. And we designed them in a cluster. And what we did as well is we used the local timber, which are tamarack or larch trees. The process was super important. We were determined not to start the design until we had a thorough understanding of the unique issues and challenges of designing for this community in the far north. Our team made 2 week-long trips to Fort Severn to engage with the community. You fly to Thunder Bay and then take a puddle jumper, I think it's called, a tiny airplane. So you look out Big Trout Lake and Fort Severn, which lies on the southern shores of Hudson Bay, a community of 500 people. This is the town plan. The chief is pretty progressive and had installed a geothermal field, a thermal solar field, pardon me, which powers the town. It had this kind of strangely suburban layout, and you can see that dotted rectangle is the site that we chose for the cluster development for the duplexes. This is very typical of the kind of housing. And what we learned by this robust community engagement really became our design strategies. The connection to the land was incredibly important for the community. We knew we had to design houses that wouldn't, within 5 years, develop mold and fall apart. Houses that were durable and resilient. Really important to work in alignment with natural forces, again, very much in keeping with indigenous ways of knowing. And obviously to build for an extreme climate and remote logistics, which are daunting. And then very foundational to indigenous ways of knowing, designed for 7 generations. This is the plan we developed on that site. So you can see these are 6 duplexes in all. The entire area is peat, so they put gravel over everything there. And we noted that they really needed front yards to park and work on the various vehicles that the residents use. So that became the front yard. We then created a kind of boardwalk that sat above the gravel that was accessible, and created kind of porches in front of the units. The largest square unit is the family one, and we used the volume to add a loft to that space for future growth, future bedrooms, play, work, storage, a place for visitors to sleep over, and so on. And then in the middle, because the children were playing on gravel in the town, we kept the indigenous landscape, and we protected it from the elements as best we could, and that became the place of gathering and play. So one example I'm just going to give you of when we talk about designing in alignment with natural forces. On the left is a diagram of the winter winds. The problem is tons of snow drifts often block the entrances to these houses. So we designed it so the winds from the west would scour the long faces of the houses, reducing snow from around the entrances. In the summer, conversely, the wind comes from the northwest, and you want the warmer breezes from the northwest to be channeled through the communal landscape, and that would also help with the mosquitoes. And the other thing was that we thought that those sort of porch areas we created could also be perhaps screened in. So working with energy engineers, Transolar again, and envelope engineers and structural engineers, we designed housing that could be built by the local community who was skilled in light wood framing. A very, very complicated exterior wall. It's very, very difficult in those conditions to control the humidity, etc. You can see it's quite beautiful, actually, on the top left. That's a stand of tamarack and a harp seal. Our team saw polar bears. That's Brian standing in front of an abandoned house, the oldest house, but you can see what happens to the large shingles. It creates this kind of really beautiful silver shimmer. And this is it in the evening, and here you can see the potential of the porches. Passive house, obviously, so restricted windows. The next two I'm going to show you are for Toronto community housing. And this one is in Lawrence Park. Oh, sorry, this one is downtown, 150 Dan Lecky Way. I'm jumping ahead. It was, this is the view from King Street East of the tower. And this is the context. It is an entire city block. It's the only social housing in that whole strip of railway lines. And what it is it's enclosed podium buildings that kind of encircle a residential courtyard, landscaped, for the use of the residents, below which is the parking and servicing, and a tower. The building was designed, of course, incredibly economically. And what we did is we adopted a kind of double-story patterning. So we created a bit of a day for night facade patterning. We used a white precast frame wrapper to rescale the tower and the podiums, to make this rather large massing look more elegant. And then what we did, for example, you can see it on the tower, we took the same pattern and actually reversed it for the glass. This is a view of the building from the park, kitty corner, and you can see at the bottom here, that's a community hall that was used both by the residents and the community, the neighboring community. I really wanted to make this building much more beautiful than all the buildings in the neighborhood. And so when TCH always basically works with the developer, and they had their phone number up and so on the building when the facades were coming together, and I was delighted that they started receiving calls for the fancy upscale condos that they were building. Had to turn all those buyers away. So what we did in the podium buildings, and here you can see on the right is all the servicing is buried, the courtyards above, and the perimeter of the blocks are lined with these podium buildings. The section model on the left, we created a skip-stop elevator situation. So we didn't have an elevator on each floor, but we actually ended up in this section only with 3 corridors. We also had a lot of grade-related units. What that allowed us to do is create quite extraordinary units, through units, a lot of access to natural light, 2-story units, and all the space that we saved from the internal corridors that you normally have, we put into the units, because we had 3, 4, 5-bedroom units, and we felt it was important that they have extra place for the kids to study and play. This skip-stop arrangement resulted actually in, on each wing of the podium, an exterior corridor with glazing, of course. And so we loved that. This became, again, another common space to be used by the families. And this is a view of the landscape court. When you're designing social housing, it's not just a residential building. You're really trying to design and build community. And so we had all sorts of things, the laundry off of this, games room, common kitchen, barbecues, et cetera, for the community. And one of the nicest compliments I think we've ever gotten on one of our buildings, our project architect was doing all deficiency list, and he overheard one of the residents saying to another This building has changed my life. Doesn't get better than that. The second affordable housing for TCH is in the inner suburbs. It was the first phase of a regeneration of Lawrence Park, which is really viewed as a pretty abysmal ghetto. So we had phase 1A, phase 1B, and there were two buildings across the road from us, across the Allen Expressway, and at the northern edge of Lawrence Park. And so this was an early sketch that I did at the top, the idea being that they would actually be sort of twin buildings, almost, and form a gateway to the new development, as well as the GTA, and frame the incredible views of downtown. We had a secondary plan, which was highly suburban. So we used, I think Ken remembers that. We said, okay, we'll use this project because we were reviewing it on the design review panel for Toronto Community Housing at the park at the time. We'll use this as an opportunity to change that. So what we did is we managed to work with North York to redesign the secondary plan completely to create much more range of intimate and finer grain public spaces, mews, linear parks, cycling and pedestrian paths, interconnected landscape spaces. Where it says phase 1A and phase 1B, those are the market buildings with a big roof courtyard, and the L-shaped below are the affordable housing buildings. And what we did, because I wanted them to look exactly the same and to look like they were one complex, but they're two very different buildings. One is a condo and one's run by TCH. So we bridged over the mews and just kind of landed the edge of the affordable housing on the deck of the market housing, and it looks like they're one building. And you can see here how that works. And this is a view from closer down. We're south of, immediately south of the Yorkdale station. So this was the other problem with our ambition to make these buildings look the same, because if you go to Regent Park, which was done before this, the affordable housing does not have balconies. And TCH, that was their policy. Why? Because they were finding with affordable housing that tenants would put all sorts of junk on the balconies and it would be unsightly and it was an operational problem. So at the first community meeting, I pointed out to the residents that there were no balconies, and the room completely erupted. They were sort of banging on the tables and standing out. They were outraged because apparently that's what they had been asking for 3 years. By the end of the meeting, we had balconies. So, policy change. that was a lot of fun. And what I did, remember the opposable mind thing? So I still had to satisfy the client. So we used perforated metal railings on our continuous balconies, and that means when you're inside the unit, you can see out, but it screens all the junk you want to put out there. This is a view of the market building, and you can see where the Yorkdale subway station is. And this is a view from the existing, at that time, Lawrence Park, and you can see the kind of housing that this is replacing. The linear park on the left, and this is the mews, where on one side you have townhouses, market townhouses, and on the other side you have townhouses that are affordable rental. And when you walk through under the bridge, which is a good place for kids to play in the rain, there's the linear park. So, last section, community and belonging. So I'm talking about two projects. The first is the Harrison McCain Pavilion at the Beaverbrook Art Gallery in Fredericton, New Brunswick. The Beaverbrook is a small public gallery with an extraordinary collection. It began with a donation of 300 paintings by Lord Beaverbrook, who also funded the building construction in 1959. His collection included very significant British and Canadian art. Obviously, now that's been expanded to include Indigenous and international art. In recent times, the oldest birch bark canoe in the world, which was from New Brunswick, built in the 1820s, was repatriated from Ireland, and it was entrusted to the stewardship of the gallery where it is prominently displayed. This is the new entry pavilion that we designed, and it completes the expansion of the Beaverbrook Art Gallery. It was designed as a loggia or a colonnaded porch addition to the existing gallery, and really functions as a social and cultural hub for a small city. They have very long and brutal and damp winters. It's very much a winter haven as well. For this colonnade, it works, the curved colonnade works as solar screening, but it also fans out symmetrically from the entrance, which is in the middle. You can just see some of the columns are a little wider, and there are these railings up the stairs. And that creates a forced perspective as you enter or leave the city. And it opens as you approach, but then, of course, closes up in perspective and gives it a kind of kinetic quality. This really was a dream project. The chair of the board rang me up one day and said, "We've got this small, really small project. Basically, we really don't have much in the way of money. Are you interested?" And I said, "Absolutely, sounds perfect." And they were a dream to work with, the board, they really were. And the good people of Fredericton. So this is the context. The site is between two parallel curves, one of the St. John River, which is absolutely enormous, and the other of Queen Street, the main street. It is right opposite the provincial legislature, and the two form a gateway into the city. When I visited Fredericton maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I was completely blown away by the quality of their historic buildings downtown. Truly amazing, and basically that's because they had no economic development. So you can see these are the civic buildings here, and the residential neighborhood right near the downtown had just endless roads, streets of clapboard buildings, beautiful, with these porches. So really it was the heritage architecture that inspired the design. This was the existing building when we came, and the galleries are 3 meters above grade level because it's in a floodplain. You can see the result of that. These are concept sketches. We set it back from the last phase, responded to the urban context of the curve, and then we have this vertical rhythm of the screen of colonnade, that in dialogue with the city. This is the plan. The gray is the new addition. It's essentially a really spacious lobby, and it's also an event space. It's free access for everybody, every member of the public. Has a cafe, fireplace, and a shop. And the other thing that was the challenge was, how do we negotiate 3 meters? We very much wanted the pavilion to relate to the street, so we raised it only 1.5 meters from the street, much closer to Queen Street, and we have on the left a ramp, and then in the middle of the plan there are these stairs that actually fill in the entire curved facade, and everyone enters at the same place, and then we have another ramp inside that takes you up to gallery level. This is the view from the legislature across the way. And at the opening was really interesting because the then Premier of the province had banned land acknowledgements. And what they did in response was the first hour of the opening was all about speeches from elders, the local chief, drumming and dancing. It was incredible. Of course, they had the high school band and so on and so forth, and the official speeches, but it was quite marvelous. And it became clear that this building actually is almost like a proscenium. It makes a great stage. We also designed it very much with light in mind, and you can see what happens with the sunlight. And you can imagine that, of course, moves with the path of the sun. All those patterns move with the path of the sun. I was really chuffed about this. Everyone knows Domus magazine, and they published it, and then they included it in the best 15 buildings, architecture projects of 2023, and this is how they described it. So I mentioned that the budget was very, very, very tight, so there are no finishes to speak of in this building, and the colonnade had to be precast concrete. We were fretting about this until one day my team and I were walking in Fredericton, and we saw a bridge construction project and these just exquisite planks, beams of precast, white precast, sitting there. We made some inquiries and found that there is a firm called Stresscon that does the most beautiful precast work. So we were very fortunate. Before the pandemic hit, we were able to go out, our team, and figure all this out with Stresscon. And every piece came and was just fitted together on the site, which was kind of remarkable. On the right is the cafe. And on the right here, you see the fireplace and the view to the legislature. It really does act as a porch. Walking past the cafe from the outside, and the inside, again, very, very little material. But what we did do is we spent some money on a felt ceiling so that there was an event of 350 people, and you could actually talk to each other in the space. It was amazing. And this is the ramp that goes up to where that portal is. That was the original plane of the facade of the old building. Goes up to the galleries, and then one of our colleagues that Bruce and I worked with on the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia, Jordan Bennett, a Mi'kmaq artist, did an installation, so that was really wonderful. The last project I'm going to show you is the Montreal Holocaust Museum, and this one is very, very personal because it's my history. We won the international competition with our colleagues in Quebec, Daoud Lestage, Lizotte Stecker, architecture. And you don't just sit down and start sketching a Holocaust museum. It's really rather intimidating. So the question was how to design a Holocaust museum at that time, 77 years after the end of World War II, when we were once again in a time of crisis and great uncertainty. We were acutely aware that fascism, racism, and anti-Semitism were ascendant and could not have imagined how much worse it all is now. The composition brief was really compelling. The museum's mission is to connect with and be relevant to diverse communities. It's a tribute to the sanctity and dignity of human life. Their exhibitions would include references to other genocides, notably the Roma and the Sinti. The site is on Boulevard Saint-Laurent, locally known as the Main. It was historically where, of course, every successive wave of immigrants settled. Our site includes several city lots and stretches from Boulevard Saint-Laurent to Rue Saint-Dominique, and is situated about 6 or 7 blocks north of Sherbrooke. This was the second part of the brief that was really interesting. It emphasized that the design of the new building was to resonate with the distinct character and spirit of Montreal and to be emphatically of Montreal and reveal the unique history and culture of its Jewish community. We knew we had to design a new paradigm for this Holocaust museum and that we couldn't do it on our own. So the smartest move we made was we invited 2 eminent academic scholars to help us realize our vision. One was Robert Jan van Pelt, who many of you might know. He's a professor an architectural historian at the University of Waterloo, the School of Architecture, and an international expert on Auschwitz. And Sherry Simon, a professor at Concordia University, who, amongst other things, was very knowledgeable about the history of Montreal's Jewish community. So I rang up Robert Jan, as soon as I saw the brief and realized and knew we were going to go for the competition. And I asked him to join our team. And he hesitated for a moment. And he said to me, "Shirley, you know that architecture can't possibly represent the Holocaust." We were completely aligned. And he said yes. It was a very intense period in the beginning, a lot of research, discourse and learning, and truly we couldn't have designed this project without those remarkable early discussions. So this is a diagram of the partie. And as I said, we wanted the building to be completely part of the urban fabric of Montreal and to resonate with it. And I should say that I worked on this project with one of our new partners, Paula Rocha, and it was an incredible experience. So René Daou had looked at the lot lines and the pattern of structure in Montreal, which is very much like other cities of that time. And we were very interested in expressing the lot lines. And then one morning, Paolo came into the office and he said, "I've been thinking about those lot lines. How about if we made them void and brought the light in?" And it was like, oh my God, that's an incredible idea. And that's what we did. And that became the ordering device of the entire project and brought light. They were skylit and brought light deep into the project. In addition, nature was woven through. You can see in this little diagram up there, there was a forecourt and an interior garden and a memory wall, which is also shown on that diagram that links Boulevard Saint-Laurent and Saint-Dominique. This was the rendering from the competition. This is Boulevard Saint-Laurent. And it actually is still pretty similar, actually. It hasn't changed that much from this. You can see where the vertical light shafts are expressed between the lots, and these blocks basically above represent the buildings that were originally there. So those vertical light shafts bring a cadence and rhythm to the Quebec limestone facades that resonates with the rhythm of the historical streetscape. The building is highly transparent at grade, very unusual for a museum of this nature, with a cafe and public agora open to the community. And the enclosed stone volumes above house the exhibition spaces on the second and third floor. This is an axonometric of the ground floor. The museum addresses one of our darkest histories, yet speaks to resilience and hope. To express this resilience and hope, nature is at the heart of the museum experience, from the treed forecourt as you enter to the open landscaped garden further into the mid-block of the site. As you enter, the cafe is on your left, multipurpose room on your right, you're in the agora. There's an auditorium, hologram room, and a classroom at the back. And in the whole zone of where the garden is, there is the commemorative space and commemorative garden, and on the left, stairs and elevators to the upstairs. This section, north-south section, illustrates, east-west section. No, wrong, north-south. Yeah, east-west section. This was always a problem on this project. Boulevard Saint-Laurent is on the west. Shows how nature is woven through the buildings. This is yeah, there we go. So this is a scan of the facade, and you're seeing the cafe, the bookstore, the agora, the memory wall on the facade. And it's under construction, and these are the photographs. On the right is the range of stone, this beautiful Saint-Marc Quebec limestone that was selected. These again are competition renderings. This is the forecourt. The entrance is on your left, and on your right is the memory wall. You can see deep into the plan, you can see the landscaped garden of birches, as we also had birches in the forecourt, which had a special significance. And on the memory wall, all that writing that you see, those are the names of the towns and villages where the almost 10,000 survivors had come from in Europe. And it runs right through the memory wall, through the project. Entering the agora, you can see the effect of this light shaft and how it would move with the sun during the day, and how through all seasons in Montreal, and they definitely have seasons, that garden would change dramatically. On the left are the elevators, and on the right is the entrance to the commemoration room. It's a little video. So this is how the garden was developed. You can see now the memory wall. And that separates the garden from the commemoration room and its courtyard. These are studies that we did, how we saw the stair as another one of those interim moments where you kind of get some relief from the content of the exhibitions. And as you walk past the garden to the stairs, again, the use of local oak, white oak, and warm material, the wood. The second floor, in the permanent galleries, you're alone with the intense relationship with history. One moves between the galleries along the Saint Laurent facade, and every time you move between a gallery, from gallery to gallery, you pass one of those vertical windows and a light shaft. So you get the light from above and from outside and quick views to the city, bringing moments of respite. This is as you arrive on the second floor. And on the left, you can see the Saint Dominique part of the building. And Rue Saint-Dominique is a very, very narrow, a very residential street, completely different than Saint Laurent. So we still using the stone, but very much changed the calibration and expression of this facade. And this is the third floor, which has the temporary exhibition space and roof garden and art, which is still all being worked on. And this is an early sketch of what the roof garden would look like. When you emerge on the third floor and go out on the roof, what is so great is that you're back in nature, but also you're back in the city, in reality now, and this whole skyline of Montreal surrounds you. So this stark contrast with the exhibits reminds us that there was hope, solidarity, and courage during the Holocaust. This project is about remembrance, community, and education, but above all, it's about survival and resilience and the affirmation of the human spirit. And I'm ending with this slide, from Andre Gide. Everything that needs to be said has already been said. But since no one was listening, everything must be said again. Does this sound familiar? It seemed apt to end with this quote. It underscores why projects like the Montreal Holocaust Museum are so important, why learning the lessons of history are so important. Ultimately, the question of what architecture can do for society is for each of us to consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. Oh, oops, that was great. Which seat do you want?
I'll take this one. Thanks.
I somehow think that I think this statement bears somehow on teaching.
Yes, just on everything, really.
On everything, but yes, it's been said, but we'll say it again.
Yes.
Because you ended on as I said at the beginning, you worked across a range of scales, but it's also across such a range of issues as well. I could dive into any of them, but I am struck, since you ended with the Holocaust Museum, it does seem like you had such a different take on it than many. I mean, and it touches on the remark with which you began your conversation. Was it with Robert Van Pelt?
Yes, Robert Van Pelt.
That architecture can't represent the Holocaust, and I think it often has tried, and that was making me think that often, our Holocaust museums or memorials, and they do more than one thing, or both of these things, I guess. But I just was struck that in this case, the museum was it didn't make that kind of effort, which I think that many museums have done, Holocaust museums have done, which is to somehow capture the pathos in the architecture.
Yes.
And you didn't do that.
No, I was completely committed to that even before I spoke to Robert Jan Van Pelt, because it comes from Primo Levi, who said that art, poetry, no art form, not architecture, writing, nothing can capture the Holocaust.
Right.
And the idea that, which architects have done, it's the kind of common response for the first wave of Holocaust museums, for most of them, is to try and replicate what the experience of Auschwitz was, which, when you really think about it, is not only really foolish, but incredibly filled with hubris. How can you possibly do that? Right. And so it actually kind of trivializes it. And so, the content is there, and I have to say I'm super excited about the exhibitions. We have a great team, and Robert Jan Van Pelt continues to be involved. There I think it's going to be quite an extraordinary exhibition, so that's really great. But that's also so everything, we could go on for hours on this. Everything has significance and meaning and buried in the history of place and of people. But everything has there's a narrative about everything, but the building is absolutely of the city. It's, Quebec materials, the whole structure of the plan is Montreal, and the building attempts to kind of balance and give the visitor some degree of respite from what they're encountering in the exhibition spaces.
That struck me as very important, because the material is often so upsetting that to be able to remember where you are in the present makes it possible to handle the historical materials which you're confronted with. So yes. When you described the passage between, as you move through the galleries and the gaps, that this is, you continually get reoriented in the world that you're in
Yes.
as you're having to face.
Yeah.
to see-
And ultimately, this is a building that truly is about hope. It is optimistic.
Mhm.
You know, we survived.
Right. Yeah.
Some of us.
Yes. And then you go up to the roof as you described it.
Yeah.
Anyway, I mean, as I said, there was a very wide range of materials, and I was also struck by one of the quotes, which was in your section on social equity, which is something I don't think I quite got it, but for nearly every injustice in the world,
for
there is an
every-
architecture that helps to perpetuate it.
Yes, yes.
Of course, I
Smart
think-
guy, that Brian Seeley.
Yeah. Of course, I
Yeah.
did think that, I mean, you were presenting a body of work that, obviously did the opposite of perpetuating
We're
injustice.
trying.
Trying. But I did wonder, I mean, I can think of some examples, but do you think that architecture in general is perpetuating injustices?
I think it always has.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. That's why we're talking about decolonizing our buildings.
Yeah.
And if I think of my childhood and all those, imperial buildings designed by British architects, it was a very, very clear message, right?
Yes.
And it's not for nothing, like Albert Speer and now Trump has, sorry to say that word, but has actually issued an edict to say that all federal buildings should be classical in design. So there's a kind of a fascist thing
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, by the way, I was always struck when I moved to Canada 23 years ago that the image of the state in Canada is it's a kind of Gothic. The American is
Yes.
classical,
Yes.
though it is an imperial image as well. Anyway, I mean, there are a number of themes that I was interested in because also, one of the big threads in the front half of your lecture is also about sustainability, climate change, and that architects are often. I mean, there two dimensions, or maybe several dimensions, to the way architects respond to climate change. One is representational or rhetorical. There's always an effort to somehow demonstrate and capture something in the way that buildings appear. I guess really the idea of greenwashing, which tries to make a persuasive argument that architecture is somehow doing a good deed. But a lot of the substantive responses are buried within the techniques of the building, whether material science or in
Sure.
mechanical systems.
Building systems and so
Building
on.
systems.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, but it also put me in mind of the challenge that sustainable practices pose to us, which is that they require a tremendous amount of technical expertise and empirical evidence-based practice. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on that and how it's affected practice or the kinds of expertise that you have to either acquire or draw upon or consultations that you have to work with.
It's huge, and the thing is that, of course, the climate emergency is coming upon us way faster than we thought, and we only learned about embodied carbon fairly recently.
Mm-hmm.
And now there are other studies being done here at the university by Shoshana Sachs, the School of Cities, about how, whether you live in this kind of urban configuration than that, it will generate a lot more carbon than another.
Mm-hmm.
It's very complex, and we're always dealing with new information. And that's why we've been very fortunate, because Alex Lukashko is, in addition to the many things he does, including teaching here, he is our lead, our lab director. And it's been an enormous investment in training our staff. We're changing all the time. And when I said that, it is truly embedded now in every project in the office, it has taken a lot of work to do that. And the thing that we wanted to be clear on was that everything is actionable. we use in our work. And we're collaborating inside with research, with people outside the office, with universities, with different agencies, all kinds of things. So everything's changed. On the plus side, everyone's collaborating on this, which is obviously why it's a kind of existential question. But it has a huge focus. And then, of course, all the other things still hold with architecture, right? So it just makes it even more complex, but very challenging. And why I'm so inspired about being an architect is we can be instrumental.
There is some, I can't quote, but I can paraphrase something that Khan said. Somebody asked him once about why he was so obsessed with servant and serve spaces, or put it more prosaically, mechanical systems. And he said it was because he hated them. So he had to develop a paradigm where he could control them, tame them, and make them operate as meaningfully in the constitution of architecture as an aesthetic dimension of its necessarily technical side. And I don't know. I mean, I'm just struck by. I mean, sometimes the solutions, which may be very technically derived, may not be very obviously technical in their final appearance.
But I think that's the whole thing that I'm so excited about, this little simple idea, because because it's not relying on technology, it's relying on physics and nature and so on.
Right.
Anyway, I digress.
No. I think we're here to digress now. You gave the pointed lecture.
Yeah.
Okay, so and then I'm jumping around a little bit because you had there were a lot of topics, but I was also struck by one of the. Now I'm moving on to the housing issue, but also in particular the Toronto projects, and just thinking that one of the things that used to be a very strong critique of the housing projects of the 60s were that social housing is that it tended to mark populations that were the beneficiaries of social housing as different. Because the architecture was different.
Yes.
I mean, the intentions were good, and the intentions of the architects were good, of the institutions as well, but they were stigmatized by their difference. And I was struck that in the two projects in Toronto that you showed, you talked about the aesthetic qualities that you tried to achieve in the downtown project. I mean, there were efficiencies and qualities of the unit design, but there was also the appearance of the building within the context of a condo market world of towers downtown. And it was important that it didn't stand out in terms of quality or even, let's say...
Well, actually, it was important that it was better quality.
Yes, okay. Yes. But then even more literally in the Allen Expressway one, that you actually have a pair of buildings. I mean, it's an interesting use of an idea of symmetry, that you have the market rate housing on the one side and the social housing on the other, and they are a pair that are indistinguishable.
The lower volumes of the affordable housing, the taller ones the market, but they are indistinguishable.
Anyway, maybe it's not a question, it's just a observation.
Very deliberate.
Anyway, also I thought the housing in the north was remarkable. Just and I also noticed that there were different configurations there, where you had, I guess, could you say anything about the different configurations of the plans of those units? I mean, there's always the big and the small, but sometimes the small was divided into two. What were the?
They were all so. We again, our team had spent 2 separate weeks there at different times, and learned very much about what was needed to really function, about the culture, everything, to really just listen, because northern communities have always been told what's good for them, and we wanted this to be completely different. But they are the same units. I mean, they're two unit typologies. We made sure, for example, the way it was laid out, that all the bedrooms were on the northern side, and where you spend your day in the living rooms were on the sunny south side. So there was a lot of thought in how you deal with the chest freezers that you need when you come back from hunting, all kinds of details. I could go on about that project for hours, but I won't.
You won't, okay. I think that the last thing I'm going to ask you about is BEAT and the changes in percentages. Then I'm going to turn it to the audience to see if they have some questions for you. But we have had years where our entering class is 70% women.
70%.
Yeah, I mean, that's not typical, but we have had that. I mean, the percentages are bigger for women, but because when I was teaching first year, I remember the distributions. I thought, oh my goodness, 7 and 3, 7 and 3. Can you say something about the ways in which the efforts that you have undertaken have changed the outcomes within the profession?
I think we focused. Well, the first thing was there was one rule: no whining. Mm-hmm. Oh, woe is me, none of that stuff. And we were going to do things that would matter, so it was a concerted effort to mentor women, younger women, to empower them, to promote them, and also to network. And women aren't great at networking, or doing the golf course and all that stuff. I can give you my views why, but it's probably not for public consumption. And it was just remarkable how. So in a sense, we wanted BEAT to be very grassroots, to respond to current issues, and not be like a typical women in architecture organization. And it had a cool name, and people just flock to it. And men are very welcome, and they come to our events. And as I say, it's spread across the country, but each chapter operates completely differently. Mm-hmm. Atlantic Canada, they do a lot online because they're widespread. And we were able, because our fundraising became quite successful when these new chapters started springing up, and we were able to give them a little bit of seed money and then also to chat with them about what we learned in our experience and so on. So it's kind of blown me away, and now there's a whole new generation of younger women and all kinds of issues that they're very concerned about, and I guess that's good.
If there's anything that we should know about how to do better at the faculty, you should let us know.
Men have a lot of work to do. Come talk to us.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to the audience to see if there are any questions for you.
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Very, very interesting. It's actually two questions if you were to answer both. One is, in the first part of your discussion, you spoke about this whole new paradigm of simple building, I think you called it. Could you, for the non-architects, elaborate on that? It sounded really intriguing. And second, all these wonderful buildings that you design, what methods and how do you know that they actually work as you wanted them to and do the things for the people who inhabit them or use them over time that you were hoping for or were in the brief or such?
Sure. Build Simple is what I think is, well, I grew up just post-war. I was born in the early 50s, and in Cape Town, South Africa, we didn't have any heating or cooling or any of that stuff. And it would get hot, and I'd have, coming home from school, I'd have 3 different sort of blinds, exterior blinds, inside, windows, whatever, to cool down my room. In the winter, it was as cold inside as outside. And so I'd have a bath at night. Everybody did this. The next morning, you get dressed inside bed because it was too cold to dress outside your bed. And we thought nothing of it. That's part of that after comfort business, right? Very connected to what the French call the terroir, the climate, and so on. So it's actually looking at centuries and centuries, how all kinds of cultures have always built in accordance with natural laws, with physics and so on. Natural ventilation, passive house, all kinds of things that make buildings really habitable and comfortable. And then post-war, with all the kind of technological prowess of all this heating, cooling, ventilation, equipment systems, people began relying on them. And I think it's because of those three-piece suits that businessmen used to wear. And when they went for their 3-martini lunches, or this is what I've been told, they'd come back to the office and they'd insist on, in the summer, on the cooling being jacked up to much, or jacked down to lower temperatures. And so we have this bizarre thing, and as a foreigner coming, it's really baffling to understand why people would live like this, to be boiling hot in the winter inside. I have a continuing thermostat war with my Canadian family, but they used to be now. And then why it's freezing in the summer. So what it is it's really going back to the principles of how buildings work, how you can insulate them and ventilate them, and minimal finishes too. You don't need to layer on so much stuff. So it's basically reduce. It's like losing the weight of everything we've put on after the war, all this extraneous stuff. And by doing so, there's a direct kind of correlation between GHG emissions, carbon emissions, and building simple. So it's an incredible way to help climate change. And the second question is, it's interesting because we're just kind of making this up. So first we have to, when we design, and we have to listen really carefully, I think, because design is simply problem solving, and if you don't understand the problem, you can't solve it effectively, and so you really have to listen to what the community or your different clients tell you what they need. And there's always a kind of a hook that someone, usually if it's a university, it's quite often the president of the university, about their vision and ambition. And then when we design, we imagine different scenarios, quite honestly. In what would happen if this happened in our plans, or this or that, and so you make the buildings very flexible. I think it's super important to design with generosity and to give people freedom and choice on how they want to use the buildings. We're very conscious now of neurodiversity, and everybody has different experience inside buildings, and so I think if you follow those principles, it works, usually.
Other questions?
Oh, there's one there.
Hi, thank you. I have also two questions too. The first one was that it was one of the social housing project, and there was an image, and on the top of it, it's that symmetrical buildings that had. And I think the name of it was a gateway. And
Oh, yes.
I was just wondering what the sort of hierarchy when you were designing it, or initially in the beginning, whether that to emphasize the Allen Expressway, to sort of have this sort of same exact buildings. And then you also mentioned that you wanted to make these buildings to look exactly the same. So I was just wondering what the sort of thinking behind it, and what was sort of the importance or hierarchy of the thinking. So that's the first one. And the second one is it's the Holocaust Museum. And you mentioned it a little bit, and it's possible that I might have missed that part, but what was the person that you were working with mentioned that oh, we can do void.
Oh, okay.
I missed that part, and I wonder if that's because of the shape of the building, how it came about.
Yes.
Hopefully, I made the
Right, thanks. So the first one is about Lawrence Heights, and two sites opposite each other, and the first phase of a very important regeneration of Lawrence Park. So much like Regent Park, that was the next big project for Toronto community housing. It was locally known as the ghetto. It really is pretty bad situation for people who live there. And when I say I wanted it to look the same, I wanted the affordable housing, which is the lower block, and the market condo housing, which is the taller block, to look exactly the same. It was what Robert was talking about. You know, in the 60s, social housing always had that stigma. And I wanted the opposite. Why can't social housing be beautiful? Right? And then the idea of twinning the two, they were the same program. And it was because they're built at the same time, pretty well, across from each other, at the entrance to both Lawrence Park and a kind of to the GTA, because you have amazing views of downtown from there. The buildings are not exactly identical. Some of the programs slightly different, but in essence, they are like gateway buildings together. And then the second question, it's a little hard to kind of figure. So we were mapping, I said that the site was made up of a series of lots on Saint Laurent and on Rue Saint-Dominique, okay? The usual, with these little buildings, you know, 3-4-story buildings, pretty narrow lots, and a kind of mid-block, which is where we planned the garden. And so how could we embed literally the kind of this, the planning of our building in the structure of Montreal? And so we were looking at these lot lines, and the first instinct was, well, maybe we can build walls, but that made no sense because you want the space to flow. And so when Paolo came up with this idea of, well, perhaps we could do the inverse and make these voids, and then we skylit it from above, so that recalls where the lot lines were, and then you get this light coming down that moves through the day, deep into the building. Does that explain it? You're nodding, right?
I think Richard has.
Richard. Uh-oh.
Thank you, Shirley. That was a really extremely elegant lecture, and I really appreciate the, in a way, the humility with which you present projects which are extraordinarily hard to pull off. But I have and so it was so beautiful, I don't want to ruin the mood, but I have a question about the Holocaust Museum around the problems we're facing now, which is you made a very bold decision to make the entire ground floor transparent and glass. And we're seeing at a lot of sites, synagogues, other Jewish community centers, guards standing out front. So, how do you
Good question.
How do you think about that? Did that come up?
It certainly did with our clients, yeah, because again the whole world convulsed and changed again, and so for the glass, there is a product. That is a kind of a security film that helps. That'll go on, so we pay a premium for the glass. It'll go on the glass. Of course, we've got, unfortunately, we actually redesigned the whole entrance to accommodate what they do in pretty well every museum now, where you go through this kind of little X-ray hoop and your bags and all that sort of stuff, and security. And a problem that we haven't solved yet, but our clients hired a security consultant. You can imagine. These massive bollards that they want all along.
The bollards
front.
that come out of the ground.
No, I wish they were.
No.
Those are too expensive.
Yeah.
No. Again, I get all the kind of projects without budgets. No, I'm afraid. So we're still hoping to think, to kind of figure out a way to avoid this row of bollards on Saint-Laurent. It's obviously to stop a car crashing in and so on. It's complicated, but yeah, we still have to figure that one out.
The other interesting thing to think about is, or the comparison, because I think it's in a way a reversal. You know, when they were thinking through the reconstruction or the reconnection of East and West Berlin after the wall came down, they had this notion called the creative reconstruction, which required all the new projects to adhere to the pre-war lot lines. And I think it's interesting to compare the results of those rules or that idea, which has a certain controversial aspect about it, to your version of that in Montreal.
Interesting, yeah.
I remember that also, I think that the federal courthouse that Tom Main did up in San Francisco was done, I think it's after 2001, and there's a whole landscape out there, which is in essence an anti-car bomb landscape. They don't look like bollards. It's disguised, but you don't have you don't have much room.
We don't have any room on the sidewalk, unfortunately. But that would be an amazing strategy. I mean, we've thought of benches and et cetera, but yeah, we're hoping that perhaps with time we might be able to figure out a solution. Those haven't been bid yet.
But the transparency does, it's kind of a hopeful statement, even if it requires all these other secondary strategies.
100%, and really a cafe, on the street. It's very much about Montreal and the city and being in the city. Yeah, and celebrating life, right?
Right. More questions out there?
There's one more.
There's one at the back.
Hi. Sorry. Thank you. I just had a question about, I think it's a wonderful way to frame this talk and these projects with the Emily Dickinson poem of the flower and the bee. And I think in light of kind of these projects, to me, my own interpretation is that it really kind of invites a reading of these projects, of kind of these elements of the flower, the bee, and reverie. And I'm wondering perhaps if maybe you might expand on like that conception for you of again of like why you decided to kind of frame these projects, and maybe I think now kind of coming back on the kind of end of this talk, maybe if there's some examples of how you see those elements kind of being expressed in maybe some of these projects that you've shared with us.
I think it's not kind of a visual element, but perhaps it resonates so much with me because I kind of do a lot of loaves and fishes projects with tight budgets, the affordable housing, even the institutional work I showed you is the budgets are pretty tight. I have certainly done academic projects which have very good, budgets and so on, but somehow the challenge of it, and it's when the bees are few, you have to rely on the imagination, right? And that just resonates a lot for me. That's why I think I kept coming back to that poem. And also you can look at the metaphor between making a prairie and what we do. When the conditions are difficult as they are now, we have to figure out a way around it.
Hello, good evening. Thank you very much for the lecture. Yes, so I have a question about the Holocaust Museum. So with projects like this, it's always very difficult to be able to translate, for example, an event like the Holocaust into a building. So I wanted to ask if you had any direct relationship between the building and the events of the Holocaust, if there was any, for example, communication with survivors of the Holocaust and how you translated that into the building. It doesn't have to be literal, maybe not the building shape, but if it's informed any decisions that were made during the design of the building.
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are three survivors who are well into their 90s and very, very keen on us completing the building as quickly as possible. And it's quite remarkable because all of them just seem to have the lightest of spirits, gracious, warm. You'd never think they'd gone through something like that. As I said, architecture can never basically represent the Holocaust. No art form can possibly do it. It's just too overwhelming and too broad and diverse, etc. But what was very interesting to me about the brief was that, Montreal and New York are the kind of major, if you like, or well-known Jewish communities in North America that have a very, very distinct culture and a high culture, and a very strong communities in both places. And so the idea that they wanted this to be very much expressive of Montreal, the city that it is, and the community. That's what led us to this idea that the materiality of the building would be very much of Montreal. The kind of structuring moves in the plan would embed itself in the structure of the city. The actual stories of those awful stories of the Holocaust are for the exhibitions to communicate, not the building. The building is to actually move the visitor through and also move them through emotionally. So that just like even when you go to a regular art museum, I always love it when there's a pause and you can look outside between galleries. It's like a palette cleanser, and it kind of refocuses you and gives you more bandwidth to take in information. And this kind of information is pretty traumatic, so we felt it was very, very important to do that.
I was thinking, Cynthia Ozick is a novelist who's written, and essay writer, and almost all of her novels are exploring the question of, did the Nazis succeed or fail? I mean, the question is always about, in some of her essays, she talks about how American writers like Philip Roth and Saul Bellow essentially recast the idiom of American English in a manner which allowed the universe of European Jewry to survive in a new form.
Yes.
And somehow, in a sense, the site of the survival, like Montreal or New York, is also, the site of the survival is also, it's inextricably bound up with survival itself.
It's like a cradle of the next chapter.
Yeah, so in a way, I was thinking that this way of thinking about the building as so derived from the texture of the world that the survivors came to inhabit and got rewoven into makes sense in the same way that Ozick's account of people like Bellow and Roth writing in a new English inflected by an historical experience is that they are bound together.
No, very well said.
I don't know. People running out of patience, or are there any more questions out there? Otherwise, we could wrap up. I did I want to pose a impossible question for you though,
Oh,
before we
great.
go, because you know, you and I were sitting in my office discussing current events. So,
Just to get us up for the lecture. You know?
and I was thinking, you know, and we were talking about, oh, these tariffs, this new set of circumstances is throwing that it's painful, but I think you said, you know, perhaps there's an opportunity in Canada to think differently about Canadian resilience and resilience, I'll say. But I mean, it will change. Supply chains will change. Supply chains will change. Costs will change.
Markets hopefully will change.
Everything is changing.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, it's probably too early to say, but have you thought? What do you think will happen to architecture? It will.
It's never good for architecture.
Anyway, maybe it's a thought we can all ponder how that will affect all of us, and not answer it tonight.
That's the resilience bit.
Yes.
But don't forget, you know, we can actually do a lot of stuff that helps right now.
Yeah.
So,
All right. I want to thank you, but before I say thank you, I just want to remind everybody that we have another event next week. In our public programming series next Thursday. And we have Stefano Pugliati, who is coming to give a lecture which is called It Is About Time. It's about time. Is it about time? It's about time. I don't know. Anyway, so Pugliati is a co-founder of the architecture practice Elastico Farm, which has offices here in Toronto and Turin, Italy. And his lecture will take place here at 6:30 on Thursday, March 13th. So we would love to see you here again. I just want to note, I mean, Stefano is working on all sorts of new ways to think about materials and stone. And so in light of the idea that we have to rethink buildings and how we think of their materialization in light of climate challenges, I think he'd be interesting to hear from. But anyway, I just want to thank you so much, Shirley. It was a great talk. I'd love to see all the different things the beautiful buildings you're making and the way in which that you are framing them for us. It was a real delight and a pleasure to have you here, so thank you.
thank you so much. Thank you.